Hello, everyone. I am so pleased to welcome you to this webinar. This is the 8th annual CIPS Salary Guide UK, sponsored by Hays. I'm Kerry Jones. I'm the editor of Supply Management, and I'm hosting a thoroughly jam-packed session today where we'll be exploring the key data and trends coming out of this year's guide. We'll be looking at salary and bonuses, about your role and earnings around the country, impact of global uncertainty, and lots more insights. So to help me do that, we have a fantastic panel. I would say the cream of the crop. We have CIPS Group CEO, Malcolm Harrison. Hi, Malcolm. Scott Dance from Hays UK and Ireland. Scott's the Engagement Director for Procurement, Supply Chain and Logistics. We also have Savita Mace, Director, Supply Management at AstraZeneca, and CIPS economist, Dr. John Glenn, who's from the Cranfield School of Management. Thank you all so much for your time today. I think it's going to be fascinating. So Malcolm, if I come to you first, could you just tell us a little bit more about the salary guide itself, but also the background to the salary guide and why CIPS is committed to this research?
Yeah, of course, Kerry. And again, welcome to everybody. It's great to have you on this call. And I'm proud and actually delighted to be able to share this definitive guide with the profession, about the profession, again, this year with you. I see this as being a strategic piece of research, and it can help you as individuals on your own career journeys. And it can also help employers who are looking to attract and to retain the best talent that there is in the marketplace. It's an in-depth analysis, and it covers more than just salaries. And I think that's really, really important. I think we'll talk about that a bit more later on. But we do look at the challenges, we look at the skills, look at talent management, and we're increasingly putting more and more focus on the important topic of equality, diversity, and inclusion. As Kerry said, this is the 8th year of producing the salary guide, and we've done this in partnership with Hays, and Hays have shared their expert insights, and they've brought some wider market context. In addition, this year, we've also got some case studies from AstraZeneca, from Lufthansa, and from John Lewis, and these add, I believe, real depth and perspective to the salary survey. This year, we've had over 7,000 responses globally, and that's the biggest response we've ever had in the 8 years of running this salary guide with Hays. And from this big response, that means we're able to produce 7 regional reports. And I think those are hugely relevant to different people in different parts of the world. So today, you're going to hear from our panel, and the focus today, Kerry, is on the UK, and it's a bit of a preview into the UK insights. And this is ahead of our official global launch on the 12th of July. So those of you who are joining us today, this is a preview. You get a chance to see all of the details and to download all of the report today. Remember, not everybody else gets this until the 12th of July.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's really exciting. And thank you, everyone who's tuned in today. Malcolm, you mentioned the preview and this being very much focused on the UK this session. But can you tell us a little bit about how all of these massive disruptions the last 2 years have actually, impacted the profession and those experiences?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been a phenomenal. I know people keep using the word unprecedented, but it has been an unprecedented 2 years for the profession. And it shouldn't have needed a pandemic and multiple black swan events for businesses to wake up to the full potential that procurement teams can bring. But the CPOs I speak to now have had more profile than ever. And it's encouraging to see this reflected in the findings which were released in our report this year. I mean, people outside of our profession really do now understand how important and fragile supply chains can be and how important they are for all of us. I mean, supply chains an everyday feature on our news channels. And although I think we've always had to manage disruption in our supply chains, I don't think we've perhaps seen so much complexity and disruption all at once. If you think about it, a global pandemic, UK deciding to leave the EU, the challenges of Brexit, and in addition to that, a war in Ukraine, all of that together, massive disruption. So I think the credibility of the profession has never been higher. And as a consequence of that, skilled people have never been in so much demand. And that comes out loud and clear from the survey. And then there's a challenge of climate change, of sustainability, and the ESG goals. I mean, just look at COP26 and the focus of COP26 on Scope 3 emissions. And Scope 3 emissions are in your supply chain. And any organisation that is serious about tackling climate change, you've got to focus on your supply chain. And that needs skilled procurement and supply professionals who are going to be absolutely key to tackling those issues head on. So it's a really, really exciting time. And I think the last point I would make, Kerry, is that one of the biggest solutions behind all of these challenges has got to be digitization and unlocking information about supply chain. So we need data, we need transparency, we need traceability, and that will allow us to take more informed and actually better, faster decisions. So for that, we need to embrace new technologies, and we need to make sure that our teams have the right skills to manage that. Data is absolutely king. So I see a really, really important future for procurement as almost a data intelligence hub for the business. So it's that combination, really good data, great systems allow you to get that data, and then fantastically skilled professionals to use that data and take great business decisions.
Well, can't argue with that. That's a brilliant combination, and I'm sure these themes will come up a lot more during the session. Thank you, Malcolm. John, could you give us a little bit more context? Because I mean, you've been CIPS economist for quite a few years now, and you really understand how these things are impacting the profession as a whole. Could you just give us a little background on what this actually means for the profession, all of these disruptions Malcolm was talking about?
Yeah, well, in terms of the context that the procurement professionals have to work in, and Malcolm talked about that in the context of the pandemic, we now have additional pressures that we're going to face because of the economic context, where many of those, the pressures on the economy, particularly in relation to inflation, are a result of the pandemic, are the result of war, are the result of the fact that there's a crisis around energy. So we see inflation rates of 10, 11% predicted for the end of this year, which are unprecedented in the last 30 years. At the same time, because of that cost of living crisis, because we're having to pay these higher prices for energy, these higher prices for food, there is a danger that broader consumption in the economy falls, and so we get an economic recession. But then in the context of what we're talking about today, the labour market is not behaving in the way that we'd normally expect it to behave in a recession. So normally in a recession, we would expect there to be significant amounts of unemployment, and we're not seeing that. We're seeing high levels of employment. We're seeing what has been labelled as the Great Resignation as a result of COVID. So particularly people of my age in the sort of 55 to 65 range taking early retirement. We've seen around 400 to 500,000 people leaving the labour market, and then that's also exacerbated by Brexit. So we now have what economists would call a very tight labour market at a time when we're potentially going into recession. We also then have the issue, and it's front of mind today as we see strikes on our railways, as to whether the existence of high levels of inflation will spark wage increases that then cause what we call a wage price spiral. I don't think we're going to see a wage price spiral similar to that which economists like me can remember from 40 years ago at the end of the 70s and the early 80s, when we had 25, 26% levels of inflation. But I do think we're seeing pressure in labour markets, and I think that's reflected in the survey with significant increases for procurement professionals. So we see high levels of inflation, we see potentially reductions in demand and economic recession, but a labour market that is very tight and is putting pressure on organisations to both attract and retain the very best talent. So it's massively important that we attract the talent. It's massively important that we develop our existing talent, and we produce a profession that is able to meet the challenges that it faces at the moment. Kerry, that's it from me for the moment.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, there's a lot of weighty information there, and we'll definitely come back to you to talk more about that. But just before that, on a, I would say, slightly more positive note, some of the results in the guide, they show that quite a healthy majority of professionals, around 62%, they feel that senior people in their organisation are perceiving them much more positively than even a year ago. Yeah, and even that was up. And there seems, there's a continuing trend that is coming through there. But is that being felt on a day-to-day basis? I mean, this overall perception, is that filtering through? I mean, Scott, what have you seen through the data so far?
So I guess in short, yes, it is seen on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of those are coming through from what Malcolm addressed earlier, that there's never been, I guess, a media spotlight on procurement over the last couple of years due to the unprecedented issues from wars to supply chain crises to Brexit, etc. And even ministers and MPs talking about procurement in the House of Commons last year, and it being mentioned in the Queen's speech this year, talking about the procurement public sector bill. So again, it's really, really heightened the profession in a positive light. And then we've seen, thankfully, and it's not quite perfect yet, the value of procurement. And I want to emphasize the word value as opposed to just using it as a cost-cutting exercise, because actually now we turn our phases, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a bit later, around ESG and what this then offers the procurement function, because actually, whilst we'll all know as procurement professionals that this has always been part of a procurement person's role, looking at supply chains, looking at sustainability and all those other issues that cover ESG. But now this has kind of gone to a business, and the CEO, and transparency is really key around all these topics, including scope 3, for example. We've actually started to see businesses set up procurement teams just to focus on ESG as their full-time job, as opposed to part of their job, which again is hopefully going to raise the procurement profession in the longer term over the next few years, which again can only be really, really good for everybody on this call, because it will open up certainly a lot of different opportunities, and hopefully exciting ones as well, Kerry.
Thank you. I mean, that's great. I mean, Malcolm, is that does that coincide with what you're seeing at CIPS in terms of value of procurement?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, completely. I mean, there've been huge shifts in the perception of this profession over the past 2 years. And I think now that we're living with COVID, the profile of procurement remains really strong. And I think the figure from the survey was, 67% of respondents said this year that they felt their directors really understood what it is that procurement can offer to their organizations. And I think that's a higher number than we've ever had. And there is this whole new focus on supply chains. And I think we're all saying the profession has never been so much in demand. And I think that's really because the profile has increased. And that's in no small part due to the way that teams have risen to the challenges. And there have been some fantastic stories. I mean, anybody who was lucky enough to attend our the CIPS Procurement Excellence Awards event last year, I mean, some of the stories that came out of what teams have done to cope with the challenges brought on by the pandemic were just phenomenal. And that's all about demonstrating the true value that procurement and supply professionals can bring. You've only got to look at the coverage in the media: shortage in supply, difficulties of moving goods from country to country, hyperinflation impacting supply chains. And these are all things that keep CEOs up at night. And that, again, brings the procurement profession right into the spotlight. And CPOs, I talked to, they are in the spotlight. The profile is great, but what comes with that is, I think, is the pressure, and the pressure to continue to deliver and to continue to come up with innovative solutions to what are really, really quite complex issues. And that's what we're operating with right now. These aren't easy to solve, and that requires, again, really, really skilled people. So yes, it's a great time for the profession. Yes, it's a challenging time. Yes, it's an exciting time. And good people are going to do well, but it's going to be tough for them as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's a few different directions we could go in with that one. I mean, for one thing, just acknowledging those challenges. And if we look into the data on the guide, managing risk is right up there on top across many categories. Of course, in these extremely volatile times, that's going to happen. But as you said, the people who are rising to the challenge and working flat out, retaining staff in the public and private sector has become more of an issue. So we have 50% of respondents in the public sector, 40% in the private, said this was a key area for them. So Scott, there's lots of reports in the national media, perhaps sensationalizing it, calling it the Great Resignation, as John was talking about previously. What does the guide tell us about that? I mean, how far is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I must admit that the Great Resignation I've heard a fair amount over the last probably 6 months now. Look, in truth, there are a lot of people looking for work. However, there are a lot of employers looking to hire people. So whilst this Great Resignation and lots of people moving around, in terms of a procurement context, the demand is far higher than the supply, if you like. Which is a great challenge. And then retention is really key, because we've all spoken about how hard it is to find somebody, whether it be from a skills point of view, same sector, wherever that might be, into different jobs, newly created roles like ESG, for example. It's about the retention that's key. And businesses that are doing that well are really looking at their working patterns, because that again is quite prevalent in the guide this year. What does flexible working mean? We're not looking for the new norm. We're looking for constant change. The world is changing at great pace, and I don't think it will stop, if I'm honest. So those HR policies that were written about, you have to log on between this time and that time, that were probably written 10 years ago, they've kind of been thrown away now, and they probably won't be referred to ever again. So companies that are looking at hybrid working, what does that mean now? We've moved on from a bit in the office, a bit not. The companies that are fully remote, or actually, can we start putting our employees onto contracts that are more outcome deliverable based, as opposed to having to be in the office or having to log on at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock and beyond between 5 o'clock. And that kind of has a bit of an ED&I slant to it, which I know we cover on later today. We've even seen on the 6th of June, for any of you that read newspapers, that 70 organizations are piloting a 6-month 4-day working week. Now, if I'd have said that a year ago, everyone would have laughed at me. But actually, this is really gaining momentum now. So we'll see how that looks in the next 6 months. But will that ever happen? I don't know now. It looks quite likely that actually the reduced working week may actually transpire maybe in the next year. Or will it fall flat on its face? I guess that remains to be seen, but it's an exciting world we live in. And to retain your staff, you've got to make sure that you're agile, more flexible and fluid than you ever have been.
Thank you. I mean, there's some really interesting points. There's a lot of difference, a lot of change, a lot of difference, even in the ways we're working. Savita, if I can bring you in here, how does that play out for you when it comes to attracting and also retaining staff, in your daily routines and your daily working?
I think it's really interesting. And then from an economic point of view, I suppose the best person to tell us the cost of retaining staff would be John on this call. But in terms of retention, I suppose if we look at empirical evidence, from people's exit interviews, if we look at the HR review and we look at the two biggest cause, the root cause, flexible working and the relationship with the manager. That those two things haven't really changed over time, pre-COVID, post-COVID. Now, post-COVID has a different sentiment, especially for women. So LinkedIn, they sort of cited that in their research, they saw sort of an impending flexodus amongst women. And 52% of women said that they had either left, leaving, or about to leave this year because of the lack of flexibility. But this is despite 80% of UK businesses putting in place some sort of hybrid flexi working infrastructure for employees. So what we're seeing here is a gap between what employees really want and a gap between what employers are offering. And I think this is where us as leaders, we're going to have to reflect on, are we really listening? Are we listening to the data points we're seeing in complaints, in tribunals, in the empirical evidence we see from sickness? Are we listening to what employees want, not in the exit interviews, but 1 year before? Are we listening to how we could customize an experience for employees so that we retain them and they have happier lives? And I think for me, it's about really listening to what employees want, and actually we have KPIs for everything, except we don't have KPIs for incentivizing people to stay. I know it sounds obvious now that we talk about it, and in the public sector, people go to work because they want to. They don't have massive bonuses like the private sector. They don't have all of the other fancy fringe benefits. Except in the public sector, there's no real incentivization to stay. So I find it really pertinent now that us as leaders, we listen and we look at the data points we have, the data points we haven't looked at before, to really see how we can ensure that we make people's lives enriched in work now.
Thank you. That's a fantastic point. Hopefully we can dig into that another time as well. So if you look at not just the employees' struggles, which are obviously quite evident, but going to employers, and they're facing some shortages and key skills that they're absolutely they need, and skills are changing, things like that. So if we're looking at the data, there seems to be a genuine concern among employers, and that's not very easy to resolve. So Malcolm, how is the profession dealing with that, and what do you believe from a CIPS perspective can be done?
So Malcolm, you're right. There is a shortage of skills, and I think what the survey is yet again telling us is that the professionals need really sound skills, really sound technical skills, and they need those across all sectors, all industries, all job roles, and that's kind of a given. And we can't really build credibility or business confidence as a procurement and supply professional without those really, really good sound technical skills. And this year, in the report, I think it says 56% of employers are requesting an MCIPS qualification. And those with an MCIPS qualification are achieving very healthy remuneration for those credible technical skills. But what we're also seeing is the demand or the need for the so-called soft skills. Everybody calls these soft skills, but Kerry, I think you've probably heard me say before, I'm not sure some of these are particularly soft. And I actually think these should more be referred to as those non-technical skills, but they are quite different to that technical skill set. And I think they're really important skills to enable you to get the most from those technical skills. But we are seeing more and more demand on top of the need for formal technical training, development and qualifications. And it's that successful blend of the technical and non-technical skills is what really driving the value of procurement in the eyes of leaders of organizations. The past few years has taught us about the need to remain current, and perhaps more importantly, to future-proof our skills and knowledge. And what I would say is that's not just about technical skills, that is about those non-technical skills as well. Change is rapid, and we've got to make sure that as professionals, we're all staying ahead of the game. And I would really encourage any professional working in procurement and supply to continually believe that however good you are, you can always get better. And that is about refreshing yourself. It's about learning new skills. One way of doing that is becoming chartered. That allows you to stay ahead, remain both relevant and responsible, as well as continuously find your leadership, communication, relationship building, and those broader commercial skills. In fact, if you look at the survey this year, you'll find that those soft, non-technical skills dominate the top skills which are in demand. And it is communications, negotiations, influencing, internal stakeholder management, supplier relationship management. Those are all really, really, really important skills. Yes, you need the technical skills, but without those non-technical skills, you can never get the maximum value from that really sound technical CIPS training.
Thank you, Malcolm. Sorry, at this point, I'm just going to remind the viewers that you can submit your questions for the panel, and we will get through as many of those as we can later. So I'm just going to take this in a slightly different direction now. Look at the big headlines, so the big figures that are telling us the trends in this year's guide. So, for example, salaries have grown once again on the back of 5% growth last year. Salaries have grown again this year by 4.9%. Obviously, this is great news for everyone, but it's also really important to understand what's driving this growth, and potential, like, is this sustainable? Is this going to continue? Or, is there any risk on the horizon for the profession? John, what are your thoughts on these big headline figures?
Yeah, I knew that you're going to come to me on that one. I would have thought that, first of all, you will actually see bigger increases. So here we go. You can come back in a year's time and tell me whether or not I got this right. I think that the profession, given the sort of fundamentals that Scott's talked about, which is essentially demand outstripping supply, so there's pressure there to put wages up. There'll be pressure to make sure that cost of living increases to a certain extent are awarded. So I'd expect to see a figure quite substantially above 4.9% going into next year. I think the other thing that we've got to look at, and it's come out very, very strong in what's been said today, is that if you have a profession that in the last 2 years has been seen to be the answer to the problem that many organisations face, it's no wonder that the profession is viewed more favourably inside organisation, and it's no wonder that CPOs are now getting a seat at the most senior table, because they're bringing the knowledge and the skills and the experience, be it soft skills or technical skills, that are actually going to resolve some of the most critical questions that organisations face now and are likely to face into the next 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. And so, Scott, in your experience at Hays, so you've seen these changes for a number of years now, 8 for you. What's your take on the salary growth and also the big headlines?
Yeah, I guess kind of to back up John, the demand again, is outstripping the supply. So yes, whilst we see that people that were listening, they see it as last year the pay increase was 5%, and this year it's 4.9%, but actually the gap has actually increased from other professions. So if we look at the Office of National Statistics, for example, they reported a 4.2% last year, and this year they're reporting a 3.8%, which actually, when you look at 5% last year versus 4.9%, the gap has widened, which means that actually procurement professionals, and partly because of the highlights we've said earlier, the profession is more valued than it's ever has been, and there's a gap widening amongst other professions, which is, again, hopefully is positive for everybody on this call today. Now, the percentage gap was those people that were in role in their current companies getting a wage increase. What we are actually seeing of people moving roles, that the gap is absolutely astronomical. And now normally when we're speaking to people looking to move, we would normally be advising that kind of a 10 to 12% is probably about normal. We're actually seeing over the last 4 to 5 months is more like 25% and 30%. And actually that might not just be to move, that might be a counter offer coming back as well, as companies actually realise, and to Savita's point earlier, the cost of actually replacing that person is far greater than actually the 20% increase that they may give the current member of staff. Now, is this sustainable? No, probably not for 25, 30%, because surely at some stage that will peter out, and it will do. But certainly, probably in at least 3 to 6 months, that will probably keep going. And then we might see a bit more of a level playing field. However, the average wage increase, to John's point, will probably go up as the profession, again, is in more of a spotlight, is more valued by the CEO or the organizations, and actually the profession sees more value on kind of ESG and other initiatives that come up throughout that, and actually kind of have a real boost to the organization. So I think that, yeah, whilst the increase is slightly down than last year, I think overall over the next year or so, I'll back John on that actually it'll probably widen.
Amazing. Thank you. 25%. That's absolutely incredible. There's some serious numbers here. Well, unfortunately, Scott, you did mention that crucial word, the gap. We can't really talk about salaries without talking about gender pay gap. And something that comes out in the guide is that it is heading in the right direction, but obviously there is still a way to go. So one of the key points at professional level, it's down to 6% from a 13% gap last year. Whereas at advanced professional level, there's been a much smaller movement. I believe that's around 4%. So Malcolm, what role can CIPS play in addressing the gender pay gap and maybe helping to shift some of these figures?
So the gender pay gap trends are something we continue to monitor each year. And Kerry, I think it is encouraging to see a slight narrowing this year at senior levels, and it's senior levels where we've seen the largest salary disparity between male and female professionals really for several years now. And whilst we can monitor the overall trends of the profession, I think it's really important to know there are other factors affecting our data, such as job role salary variations, and they vary within levels, they vary between sector, they vary between industries as well. So yes, I think these are encouraging, and it's encouraging particularly at the professional level, or as you say, Kerry, the gap's narrowed by 7% down to 6%. But I think this is hugely important. But at the advanced professional level, we still do see the biggest gap at 26%. So to me, yes, we've had some progress, but there is considerable work still to be done. And I think the real question is how do you try and close that gap, and that gap at the advanced professional level? And I think there are a number of things that need to be done to address this. So, first of all, I think there is a role for professionals themselves to make sure that they are absolutely striving for equal opportunities and equal pay. That, to me, is a given. If you're doing equal role, irrespective of your gender, you should be paid equally for that role. And there's a role to be pushing for in your organizations to make sure that we continue to narrow that trend across all levels. But I also think there's a huge responsibility for organizations. I think organizations should have a comprehensive set of equality, diversity, and inclusion policies, and that is about ensuring that you can attract talent, that you have the right retention strategies, that you have tailored flexible working options. They're very key important. And indeed, we've covered that in more detail in the ED&I, the Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion section of our report. But there's a big role for companies to play here. And this is not just about the procurement profession, but there's a big role for companies to play to make sure that they are supporting different genders and supporting them equally, and ensuring that everybody has an opportunity to get to as high in the organization as they want and to be paid fairly for that. So it's a really, really important topic, this, and it does require a change in behaviours. It does require everyone to create that environment where everybody feels that they can meet their full potential, regardless of their age, their gender, their sexuality, their neurodiversity, their disability. It is about creating that equal, diverse environment and that equal and inclusive environment, which allows everybody to be able to thrive and develop.
Absolutely, and you mentioned the difference between employee and organisation. That everyone's got a part in this. So Savita, what is your experience of tackling such a huge topic, say, in your organisation?
I think I'm going to answer this question from a lived experience. And I suppose I'm picking up on what Malcolm said. It does start with us. For women, we're used to multitasking. We're used to processing at speed. We know what we're worth. We know how to calculate from our research what men make, what we should make, etc. And we don't settle for less because we can't negotiate. But there's more barriers for us. At a human rights perspective, at a basic level, when we think about fairness, fairness is about customizing for the individual based on our protected characteristics. And one of those characteristics is gender. So if you're listening to this broadcast and you're a people manager, are you customizing for the 9 protected characteristics? Are you looking at your data to see where you should be setting your targets to close the gap? there's still a 26% gender pay gap in procurement. So that essentially means I'm working 2.5 hours for free more than Scott every day. But I think, systemically, the data is comprehensive. We know that our research on glass ceiling, on glass cliff, on glass chains, is that the more we lead as women, the more we lead and the more we drop that ladder for other women, representation matters. And I lecture at 2 universities, so I can tell you that this year I've seen 57% more young women joining procurement and supply. And I've seen women from pharmacology, I've seen women from IT, from finance coming into procurement. And it's because there's more women now on the boards. In the 1970s, if we look at the board, I couldn't find one female. Today, there's a drastic improvement. And I think, these women in the 1970s, they paved the way for us. And it's our accountability and responsibility to pave the way for the future generation. So I would say, let's pay forward. Let's support other women in their careers, and let's make, a work-life balance possible and create equity and equality.
Absolutely fantastic. I think everyone can get behind that. I haven't heard of a glass chain or a glass cliff before, but
you can Google it.
Scary, I think, probably. In addition to that, there's a slight disconnect, going back to the guide, there's a slight disconnect between professionals a lot of professionals absolutely see how important certain issues are, like diversity and inclusivity, as you mentioned. But then actually achieving that and making that part of the organization's culture is quite a different step. So I'm interested in, Scott, what do you think about some key strategies to creating more diverse workforce, not just diverse, but inclusive, places where people want to work, places that are healthy and growing in that way? And what can people do today to actually, to move towards that goal?
You're right there, Kerry. There are 2 points to this. There is diversity and inclusion, and people often forget that. You've also obviously got your current employees and also employees you're trying to attract as well. So there's some simple things that actually don't cost money or a whole huge transformation around changing HR policies, etc., that you can do today. So, for example, if you're trying to hire a person, do you have a diverse interview panel, for an example? And there are loads of organizations that don't still. They still have that same person that hasn't had any training in recruitment for a long time or any ED&I training around how to represent the company, to actually know what's going on within that company that they can obviously sell. There's also websites, careers websites are still heavy textualized and without any videos, without any diverse people or pictures or visual images or anything that's going on. A lot of companies, I think, that are trying to do the right thing, but it's not very visual. So actually, current employees don't even know what's going on. Things that you could do if you manage even smaller teams is actually having an ED&I champion. So whilst most large organizations have somebody that looks after this, normally from a HR context, are the messages, are the key initiatives, the social value, is that being, cascaded throughout your whole organization? Because an employee that sits, say, remotely, do they know what good that the employer is trying to do, the organization is trying to do? Probably not. So actually, how can we cascade that? And then again, in terms of employing people, when was the last time your job spec was rewritten? Probably a long time ago. I still see bland job descriptions that just mentions the same things about you have to have category management in X, you have to have had 5 years worth of experience, which basically just cuts out everything that's diverse about a job spec. It doesn't talk about flexible working in its entirety to encourage maybe working parents, for example. It doesn't talk about things around the whole, learning and development. So in case you haven't got experience, that you might be able to get some training off the back of that. Yeah, it doesn't talk about all those types of things, which it needs to start being more inclusive from a job description. Are you operating a 4-day working week? Put that in. What are you doing in terms of, again, your social value point of view, going to local communities, or are you still trying to fish from the same pool as you've always recruited for the last 5 to 10 years? So it's about all of that. And what I've just mentioned there doesn't actually involve the wholesale change from your HR community and revamping everything and, you know, whole cost transformation. A lot of that is just simple basics that you can take away. But this is a whole other topic that we could spend another hour on. So I won't digress for now, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's a really great point about job descriptions and also language. I think the language we use in them. And Savita, can I come to you as well? Do you have any advice for people who might want to improve their diversity?
I suppose it starts with our understanding of diversity. I suppose John on this call can tell you all of the evidence on the economic case for diversity. And, you know, when we think about diversity now and inclusion, you know, we kind of short wire what diversity means. In the 70s, it was about gender, so women. And today, a lot of people still think diversity is about ethnic minorities, but diversity means all of us. Each of us, we come with intersecting identities, our age, disability, race, and so forth. You know, and I think when we look at what should we do for a more inclusive and diverse workforce, we have data, and it's data that we're not looking into. What are our problems, and why are we not getting the kind of ratios that we set out to get? Well, look at the data, look at your turnover, look at your complaints, look at your litigation, look at your sickness, all of the data points that tell you why people are unhappy and why people are not joining your company from diverse backgrounds, diverse in skills, diverse in ethnicity, or whatever it is. And I think, you know, for us, and you asked a question earlier, what can we do if somebody's listening on this call? Well, we should promote widely. We should ensure that we do a proper, you know, benchmark pay assessment internally and externally. You know, we encourage talented women internally from other areas, so somebody from marketing or finance. And it's not just, as sort of Scott was saying, it's not a cookie cutter where you just promote the same people and you advance their career in procurement. You know, people in other careers can be just as talented or are just as talented. Another thing which I saw working really well, and I reverse mentor somebody on the C-suite, is that C-suite reverse mentoring, but not only by females or by somebody of an ethnic minority background like myself, but by a disabled person, by somebody who's nearing retirement. So that's sort of somebody from the 9 protective characteristics should be reverse mentoring. So your C-suite gets a new lens on some of the issues, and build a pipeline to encourage women to sort of throw their hat in the ring 2-3 years before the job comes up. You know, women should be encouraged to say, well, actually, you know, I want to go for that director role. Can you help me create a pathway, a development pathway? And they should feel sort of encouraged to do that by line management or by the C-suite. So those are sort of some of the things that I've done personally and that I encourage as a leader women to do.
Thank you so much, Savita. Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. John, if I can come back to you after, obviously, we opened with the wider context and we've explored some of these specific areas. But how would you tie this all back into the big questions?
So it's pretty apparent on this call that the profession over the last 2 or 3 years has performed incredibly well in incredibly difficult times. And as a result of that, the profession has done itself no harm in terms of its reputation with the broader organisational context. So we've seen that. I'm sorry to disappoint Malcolm and that my presentation suggested that there are even more challenges ahead, but there are. And we see that the profession is going to have to meet those challenges, and there's an expectation to do it. And also Malcolm used a word that I wanted to pick up on, which I don't think is in the general debate too much at the moment. The one thing that is going to get organisations through the challenges that they face over the coming years is an increase in productivity. Okay, if we find our cost base going up, the way that we can offset that is by becoming much more productive. And to become much more productive, we have to be more skilled. We have to want to go to work and work hard. So creating the kind of environment where people want to go to work, they want to enjoy going to work, and we fully utilise the capacity and capability of the workforce that is there is increasingly important. So the whole agenda then that Scott and Savita we're talking about in terms of how do we motivate people into the profession? How do we retain people into the profession? How do we make sure that the people who are in work enjoy being in work, want to stay with us and want to become productive? And then this whole notion around the whole ED&I agenda. Why are we going into bats? I know we talked a lot about cricket before this call, with effectively one arm behind our back, because we're not going to utilise the full capacity and competence and capability of the workforce that we have. It's borderline insanity. But then I think Savita used a really neat term, which is that we have to pave the way, and that then pushes the responsibility back onto us. Because in order to get this agenda addressed, the ED&I agenda addressed, it necessitates a behavioural change. But the behavioural change is incumbent upon us, not them. If we wait for them to do it, it will never happen. And again, I think the interaction between Malcolm, between Savita and between Scott made it very, very clear that if that behavioural change is going to occur around ED&I, and we are going to realise the case for diversity, which, as Savita suggested, has been proven beyond any reasonable doubt, then it's up to us to push that behavioural change as a profession.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you all the panel. I'm going to go to audience questions now. We'll try and get through as many as we can. So just bear with me. I'm just going to check for me. We've got quite a lot. So first question, public sector will find it difficult to keep up with potential salary increases being posted. Does the panel think this will result in more people leaving the public sector, moving into the private sector?
Maybe that's something. I think there's a real danger that could happen. I think that again, if the public sector is going to pay the type of pay increases that are going to be competitive over the next 1 or 2 years, it's going to revolve around this issue of productivity. If the public sector can become more productive, then it can afford to pay those pay increases. So again, the value that the profession is adding to the organisation. And I know Scott talked about some eye-watering. I thought at one point, Kerry, you were considering moving your current employment for a 25 to 30% uplift in your salary. Yeah, I think that, you know, we have to react to the profession is in a position where it can add enormous value to the organisation. So I can afford to pay you 25% more if you're solving all my problems and you're making my business 30 or 40% more efficient. Okay. Now, I'm not suggesting those types of pay increases are going to be sustained for a long period of time, but you get the point. We need to drive this productivity issue.
Thank you. And so this one might be more for Scott, but do correct me. So does the panel think that flexible working will impact on projected salary increases?
Good question. I think we was asked this last year as well around remote working. You know, if people, for example, are working for a company that's based in London but live, say, in Birmingham, should they be paid the same from a London weighting point of view, and what does that look like in the future? Look, I think that at the moment, the demand is so high that this won't come to fruition just yet. I think that's probably another question for kind of 6 to 12 months. Again, I think I said this in one of my questions, that it will level out at some point because it has to. But I think actually more and more what people are looking for is the type of job and what's more than just pay. We've always said this before, just because you get paid more, it shouldn't mean that you want to leave your job. You should be leaving your role for a better type of job, and whether that is more flexibility, a better diverse culture that you want to work for, a company that's leading ESG, and other factors apart from just salary. So that should never be the main driver. And if that is, seriously think about what you want to do longer than just the 6 months of getting an extra pay increase. Think about the wider agenda in that.
Thank you. Another one here. This is a question for Scott and Malcolm. Would you consider asking for the CIPS Code of Conduct of Ethics in the recruitment process to promote diversity? It says, appreciate this may likely only affect roles that request CIPS, but if that is already 56%, then that's quite an interesting topic.
Shall I have a go at that one, Carrie? I mean, I think ethics is hugely important, and I think the challenge with ethics is, we quite rightly have a code of conduct. We quite rightly promote ethics. We quite rightly promote how important ethics and integrity are to the profession. When I talk to many large businesses, though, particularly large employers, they will have their own codes of conduct. They'll have their own ethics tests. And that's actually not just about the profession. It's about the tone that they want to set for their own businesses. So I don't think we as a professional body are going to be able to mandate it. I think what we can do is stress how important we think ethics are. And everybody talks about the CIPS ethics test. I wish we would call it the CIPS ethics training and test, because an awful lot of this is about training. It's about honing your skills, understanding what's going on in terms of the approach to ethics. And whilst we're talking about ethics, actually, the last thing I've got to say is that everybody's talking about these 25% pay increases. I think, Scott, you're responsible for bringing this up. From what I have seen, that is only applying to people at relatively low levels of salary. It's not as if people who are already paid very significant salaries are getting those sort of increases just before anybody gets excited on this call.
Thank you. So what about the actual the guide itself? So how have salary structures changed in terms of basic salary versus bonus versus benefits? Have you seen a change in that pattern?
That's probably one for me, I would say. We haven't seen a huge change, to be honest, in terms of structure at the moment. A lot of the total package has actually been the emphasis on flexible hybrid working. That's where the changes have changed. Again, we talk about this 4-day working week or this fast-paced Friday that I heard somebody talk about the other day, where if you get all your work done, you can finish early on a Friday. There's been more emphasis been put on that than bonuses and structures of pay. So yeah, we haven't really seen that. I think that businesses need to be more fluid around how they look at their benefits packages moving forward, and including those types of agendas, looking at holidays and pension contributions, because they're still vitally important. But yeah, at the moment, a lot of it is hybrid working, because I think companies are still trying to get their head around what is good and what isn't good, because at one end of the scale, you've got companies that are doing completely flexible, completely hybrid, don't even know what time you log on, but just get the work done. And then companies are saying you've got to come in 3 days a week, but also you have to log in and you also have to come in these certain days. So until we find a bit of more of a pattern on that, then we'll probably see then everything else change from a structural point of view of a package.
Thank you. This might be a bit more of a tricky one, so maybe a bit more of a discussion. But somebody said, how does one benchmark themselves? So if you want to use the Hays salary average to boost your own pay, they said job titles, responsibilities, and what you actually do varies so much on a granular level. Obviously, we're talking averages here. How would you use the guide to your best benefit?
Carrie, can I give an answer to this?
Sure.
And then I'm going to throw this back to Scott, who I'm sure will have maybe a better, not a different answer. I mean, I think this is true of any salary survey that I've ever seen throughout my career. These are averages. And the reality is that there is quite a wide spread around those averages. And actually, you know what, the more senior you get, probably the bigger that spread is. And that does vary by sector, it varies by industry. So I would say, if I was using this guide, it's a really good indicator. It's an indicator of the way salaries are moving. It's an indicator of where I might be in that range. But I'd be cautious about trying to use it too empirically, unless Scott can think of a better way of using it.
No, I completely agree, Malcolm. I mean, the good thing with this salary guide, as to other salary guides I've seen, it is broken down by sector as well. So you will have a bit more of a guidance, private, public, and also the industry you work in. But yeah, it's a guide. You shouldn't be using it to throw on your boss's desk to say, I'm underpaid, because as Malcolm suggested, it depends on the organization size, but a lot of it comes down to the spend you're managing as well. And there also can be lots of ambiguous job titles within organizations. So, if I'm a head of procurement, but I'm the head of one person, I'm technically the CPO, but am I really? Whereas a large company that has 300 employees that is the head of procurement, that's not a level playing field in terms of what that person does on a day-to-day basis. So to look at I'm underpaid if I'm the head of procurement of one person versus that person, that's not quite the right, but it's an overall guide.
Thank you. And this might be a bit of a quick one. So are you planning any different types of salary guides in future? For example, a bigger in-depth look at EDI, or different those 9 different characteristics, or perhaps even benchmarking according to ethnicity?
Look, I think I would say we're always looking for ways to improve the usefulness of this guide. And as Scott says, it is a guide. So I think the more we're able to look at those different dimensions, the better. But this all depends too on the quality of the feedback that we get. I mean, as Savita said, the main reasons that people leave jobs are actually not about salary. They're more often about your boss, or they're about the lack of career opportunities. Now, how you start being able to tease that sort of information out in a guide, I'm not sure. So quick answer, yes, I'd love to find a way of getting it to be more useful. Yes, I'd like to find a way of including other dimensions, but it does require on the quality of the inputs, the data that we get back.
Wonderful, thank you.
I think, Carrie, something for the audience. I mean, a bit of a teaser. The upcoming CIPS annual conference in October, there'll be lots of workshops, lots of seminars on innovation and attracting diverse talent, and there'll be something in there about ethnicity, pay gap, etc. So keep your eyes peeled for that. It's a bit of a teaser for the conference.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Savita.
And just to echo on those points that Malcolm, both Savita have said, that actually the guide has evolved over the last few years. If probably you looked 5 years ago, there probably wasn't a lot about the kind of those diverse backgrounds. It was more gender pay gap, if that. But now actually we have got loads of different characteristics, and we're always looking to improve that. So again, feedback is key, because without feedback, detailed feedback, we can't improve anything if we don't know that you want it improved and how to improve it. So yeah, please keep coming with that.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We had a couple more questions about detailing how the report's put together, but this is actually explained in the guide itself. So for people attending, please do, you can read that and find out all about it. But yes, thank you. I'm going to wrap up the audience questions there and get some final remarks from Malcolm.
Okay, great. Kerry, thank you very much. And just before I get into my final remarks, I'm just going to pick up on one of the things we were talking about. And that was, I think, a really important one about the difference between public and private sector. And as some of you know, I've worked in both. And I do think in recent years, many parts of the public sector have gone a long way to trying to try to address some of that salary gap. And I think they've done a good job of doing that. They may not have closed it totally, but they've done a good job. I also think most of the fantastic people that I work with in the public sector are not just motivated by money. And I do think that is an important reflection to have. And we've said it several times. Yes, this is a salary survey, but it's not just about salaries that make you choose where it is you want to work or who it is you want to work for. I just wanted to make that point and actually give a bit of a shout out for the public sector, because I think there's some great people that work in procurement in the public sector. So look, I think my final words, though, as you asked me to wrap up, my final words really to everybody on this call, as to each of you as individuals and professionals. And what I would say is this is an amazing time for us as a profession. So be bold, challenge that status quo, always ask questions, always confront those brutal facts. And there's lots of not very nice answers out there at the moment. Doesn't matter. Never be satisfied with an incomplete answer. And seek out that better way. There is always a better way to improve a supply chain for the benefit of your organization, the benefit of our communities, and even for the benefit of our suppliers as well. So these are really exciting, challenging times. And I think it's a great opportunity for you to rise to that challenge, keep your skills up to date, profit from the opportunity, both as an organization in terms of your career fulfillment and also for you as individuals, and ensure that you're keeping all of your teams professionally qualified and skilled as well. And you remember, if you end up leading a team, you can never do this all yourself. You need to have a really good team around you. And there are great courses, great trainings out there to make sure that your teams are professionally qualified and have got those really good non-technical skills as well. It's a really exciting career. It's a really exciting time, and it's great to be part of our profession today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Malcolm. I just have a quick reminder to that everyone that's watching today will get exclusive preview. We get early access to the UK Salary Guide. You'll be able to have a look at that right away. And this is also the first of a series of webinars, so you can join us where we will look at different salaries, gender pay gap, and skills in greater depth. But thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for everyone for sharing their expertise today.